Hello and welcome to How I Hire, the podcast that taps directly into the best hiring advice and insights. I'm your host, Roy Nodowitz, founder of an executive recruiting and leadership consulting firm called Nodo Group. My team and I have spent the last decade helping to build iconic consumer brands one hire at a time. Visit us at nodogroup.com to learn more. I'm excited to welcome Kevin Rutherford to the show today. Kevin is the CEO, also known as the Chief Eternal Optimist at Nuun Hydration. Nuun is an innovative Seattle-based company that offers clean ingredient lifestyle products for everyday hydration. Before joining Nuun, Kevin was the president and CEO of Caldrea. He's also served as the marketing director at Kashi Company and senior brand manager at Miller Brewing, as well as S.E. Johnson. We'll discuss Kevin's people-first approach to his work, and he'll share how he builds culture through purpose and vision, and how he evaluates the core competencies of leaders and teams. Kevin, thanks for being here. It's great to have you on the podcast.
I'm stoked to be here. Always love chatting with you, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot from you today.
One of the things that's really interesting about you, Kevin, is that you call yourself the Chief Eternal Optimist, or CEO. And that's something I've always felt about you. You're a positive force, and I'm interested in whether or not you've always been that way, or is this something that you've worked on and developed over time?
Fair question. At times, I don't think I'm an optimist. At times, I'm like, Kevin, get with it. Come on. You do different personality assessments and whatnot, and done a few different exercises to truly distill down to who you are, and I think that's just a constant growth learning curve. And if I could distill it down to one word, it would be the word possibilities, which correlates with optimism, right? It's like It doesn't mean you don't see issues, but you see the possibility of going, okay, so now what? Back to your point of, have I always been that way? I think so. I've done a lot of self-reflection back to when I was a kid, and I think about sports in particular. I've always felt like, I can win this. I can beat you, even if there's just really no chance. But in my head, I'm like, I can do it. I just don't give up.
That carries over to endurance sports for you as well, right? That mindset probably serves you well.
Very true. Very true. I think it starts with belief in yourself, and then belief in a vision, and belief with a team. And you got to be vulnerable and put your heart into it and say, I can do this.
I'm really interested in how this translates into your current role. But before we get into that, I wanted to go back to your first big career break. Who hired you? What was the reason you got hired? And can you tell us about how you got started in the industry?
I think you and I have talked about my career journey a few times, and there are different inflection points that I think have taken me different ways on this journey. I talk about my career journey, and I always start with Canada and culture of Canada. And I think it's safe to say per capita, Canadians say sorry more than any other country. But I believe that there is something about an accountability that Canadians take with their actions. I could be wrong, but there's something about saying sorry is like, what could I have done differently? And, when we talk about society and from white privilege, I'm the white male from Canada.
Yeah.
I actually didn't really internalize maybe the advantage that I've had. So there's a lot of luck here.
Mm-hmm.
In my entire career, from the first job out of university, I've always had somebody trying to pull me in or forward. Somebody was part of the network that said, you need to meet this guy, Kevin. I think that's a really important note. So I truly I look at that and I go, every single instance, someone can't manage that. So my advice to people is, it's a small world, live with a servant leadership mentality, always leave a job or role, wherever that is, internally or externally, better than you came in. It was great advice I got. You can influence that. I can't say everyone's going to be as lucky as I have been.
So let's talk about your career path. What are the different experiences that were additive to where you are today?
My career started back in Canada at Loblaws as a retail buyer. It's actually an incredibly leading retailer up in Canada. It's interesting, the very start of my career, what I did learn there that's applied for me from a competency perspective in particular is it helped me understand because I moved into marketing after that, I understood the other side of the desk and who were serving from a customer, not a consumer specifically, but a customer perspective. And I would say that's probably the biggest takeaway that has kind of stayed with me way back then. And my career then went to marketing because that was a real passion point. And I love marketing. As I reflect on it, I think what I love about it is it's about connecting with people. It's really trying to understand what people need or want. I started in a very traditional tier one, if you will, CPG, consumer packaged goods company, and that was SC Johnson, a family company. And I started there in Canada, and they moved me to the US back in 2001. There's many things, actually, I would argue SC Johnson set the foundation for me in my career more than any other place. It was like taking an MBA real world is how some people would describe it if you're working at Procter & Gamble or SC Johnson or Clorox, right? The list goes on with some of the Kellogg, et cetera. The fundamentals that I learned was one around kind of marketing principles, data analytics. Back then, it wasn't called performance marketing. It's trying to make sure that everything counts and really getting some data analytics behind it and making impact with it. And then there was also cross-functional leadership. I think I was emulating behavior that I was seeing early in my career. I was like, oh, I like that style.
Yeah.
And what was interesting is early in my career as the brand manager, I was leading people much older than me and more experienced cross-functionally. And yet I've just felt naturally there and I feel like I was really welcomed. So I think there might be a style of inclusivity that I use and that optimism probably comes through and then people start to believe in themselves and then away we go. That's held true throughout my career as well. SC Johnson also taught me how to assess talent as you're coming in. So whether that's internal performance reviews to mentoring, but also recruiting. So at SC Johnson, I had the privilege in the US when I moved to the US, I had the privilege of leading all of the marketing recruiting. So that's SC Johnson.
That's a great background for hiring to have all that experience.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for my experience at SC Johnson. So the next part of my career, I like to say I went to another all-natural products company, Miller Brewing Company. From a marketing skill perspective, what I learned was it's really difficult to connect with the consumer on emotional connection, but if you do, it's really powerful.
Yeah.
If you think about the differences between Miller, Budweiser, Coors, like the big mainstream brands, sorry, beer folks, if you're listening, they're not that different, but there's an emotional connection that the beer companies have done really well. From SC Johnson, it was a little bit more like, what's the benefit? What's it doing for you? What's the reason to believe? At Miller, it was like this emotional side. If I had one takeaway from a people perspective, I'll never forget this little snippet of a conversation when I was talking with the president of Miller at the time, Tom Long. And he said to me something that still hits home as now as a CEO, it's still there. And he's like, Kevin, here's the thing. I sound like I'm saying the same thing all the time, right? But I'm always campaigning, and not campaigning in a negative sense. It's to make sure everyone keeps staying on message and they understand the focus and what we need to do in terms of priorities. And you'll get bored of it before everyone else, right? The next stop on my career journey was life-changing on how I looked at business. I was working at the Kashi Company as a marketing director, and that career experience completely changed my outlook on business. Driving a business through mission, values, purpose. Like this team lived it, and I loved every minute of it. And it's so much bigger than cereal for the team, especially. So much bigger.
Is that connection to mission and purpose what led you to Caldrea? It seems like a common thread that you really have to feel that connection.
You're spot on. And then create a sense of belonging for the team to this mission. When I went from Kashi, where I never thought I would leave, and because I just loved it so much, I had an opportunity where SC Johnson had acquired the Caldrea Company, and they were looking for someone to take over for the founder. My background kind of fit. And what I learned at Kashi, I kind of used that to develop, if you will, my playbook coming in, although I'd never been a CEO before. So I thought I had a playbook. I don't know if I'm optimist or naive. I don't know which one. But I came in with a playbook in my mind, and a lot of it was centered around purpose and mission and values. And it's something that the team didn't have, but it's fascinating how it worked. Because if you fast forward a few years later, we made a top company to work for by Outside Magazine.
That's amazing. I think that it's an entrepreneurial thing. I've talked to lots of entrepreneurs, and I know that for most successful ones, failure just isn't an option. And whether that's optimism or simply a fear of failure, whatever it is, it seems that you have that true entrepreneurial spirit. And, that's proven by your track record of growth at every company that you've ever been involved with. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. It's funny because I haven't started a company from scratch. I don't think of myself that way, but I do think the mindset is similar. There's also kind of being resourceful and scrappy mentality. And if you go back in my career at Miller Brewing Company, like there was a scrappiness that we did, and we did things under the radar and then popped it forward. And we did it at Kashi. It existed. At SC Johnson, we did it too. So I think that entrepreneurial spirit, as you call it, I think it actually existed even within a big company.
We talked about this when we connected on the topic initially about being part of your Canadian experience. Can you elaborate?
I do think there is possibly a correlation there. And the reason I say there's a correlation is the depth of resources in the US, just like think about the size of the population, the size of the economy, therefore the size of the opportunity. Comparatively speaking to Canada, although much larger in landmass, but much smaller, obviously, with economic opportunity and number of people. You really need to be resourceful. The depth of resources just isn't there. And so you think much more like a generalist. You're basically the expert of nothing, but the knower of all, meaning you know what questions to ask, or at least to try to get enough to move forward. Analysis paralysis just doesn't work in Canada because you don't have enough data to keep going. I got enough. Let's go.
Right. That's interesting. So that's part of your lived experience, and you translate that into your work now, even though you technically may have more resources in the US.
Yeah, I actually think it translates really well in the US because I have several friends from Canada that have come to the US and actually done really well. I do think there's something about, I've got enough, let's go. Because you just assume that there isn't more to get. There's no more deep pockets to go find it.
How did your approach to building leadership teams evolve from working at SC Johnson to Nuun?
As you asked that question, I'm thinking, my gosh, I'm really fortunate that I started at SC Johnson because they really do focus on culture and people. It's a different type of culture than probably what I'm trying to build at Nuun and before at Caldrea, but it's very inclusive. And so I learned that early stage of my career, that inclusivity, listen first, right? The Coveyism of seek first to understand, then to be understood. In fact, we even had training, just to give you a perspective for SC Johnson, is when you were working on advertising, which is advertising, as I like to say to the team, even today in the digital world, it's the same idea, just different medium. Advertising is not the most important thing we do, but it's likely one of the highest profile things we do. And so think about that. So it's so high profile. And then you've got, when you're assessing ads, you've got like the agency, and then you've got multi-levels in a boardroom at SC Johnson. So this inclusivity is really interesting. The person that speaks first is the most junior person after you see the ads. That's a lot of pressure, by the way, for the junior person. You need to make sure that your voice matters. I hold true to, now as the CEO, so I guess on a hierarchy, the most senior person, right? I hold true to speaking last. Other than if I'm leading the meeting, I'll kick it off and set the tone. I do hold true, though, and I'm certain the team at Nuun and previous teams would attest to that, is I'm not shy in speaking my mind. I can talk way more than I should, but I'm very conscientious of being one of the last to speak. Like I really do. And so if folks aren't talking, I will try to pull people in, right? Like, Roy, what do you think? And like pull that out. And if there's someone missing in a room, meaning their voice has been missing, I will consciously be thinking about pulling those voices in. And so that really did start back, I think, at SC Johnson. And that's held true. I think where I've evolved is there's a common thread that I think purpose and mission bring that I didn't think about earlier in my career.
Yeah.
I thought about, how do I win a market share? Like it's a little bit of like a scoreboard game in many ways. We all have to be passionate about the mission. Like we have to be all in on that. The diversity of thought is how to bring that to life. Yeah. One of my favorite stories is when we were looking to hire somebody, a senior person in operations at one point. It was a very talented individual, really great. honestly, I thought great culture fit, really embraced our mission. However, as they got to know a little bit more about the team at the very end, they said, I'm out. I think they almost thought we were a little bit cult-like because we were like obsessed with the mission. And they were like, I need to separate my work from my personal life. I think that's really difficult with a purpose-driven company. I'm not suggesting we're trying to intrude on your personal life, but the purpose and mission is very much about making positive change in the world. In our case, it's around, hydration that empowers the world to move more. So it's about movement, just like we know that movement is at the core of this. And if that doesn't get you going, you probably shouldn't come to Nuun.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that's really interesting. You want it to be inclusive for everybody, but you're also trying to stay true to the core values and what people are trying to accomplish as a team. When it comes to being values and purpose and mission driven, where does this start in the hiring process for you?
I would say that the early stages are first and foremost making sure that the competencies, results of the past and impact reflect kind of, fitting and helping accelerate our roadmap, if you will, like how we want to proceed forward. So that's where it starts. The folks, when we're hiring, will see a pretty good breadth of cross-functional leaders when they're interviewing, not just the function where they're being hired into. Within there's a commonality of the mission and trying to understand, hey, what's your thoughts on that one? Are you embracing that in their own way? They're going to try to tease that out. To be clear, it's not culture fit you're looking for. You're looking for culture add.
Yeah.
That's a really good modifier. I don't want a bunch of Kevins on the team.
Right. That's been a differentiation in terms of how people think about culture. It's a common theme this past year, and I think it's a good direction for that to become the language for how we think about culture, experience, and talent. So let's talk about that. You have a really strong group of people working there, and I'm sure at least one person didn't feel like they were necessarily a fit. So how do you create an inclusive culture?
It's a constant evolution. For me, I believe that culture is alive. It's a living ecosystem, right? It's relationships, it's connections with people. And so strategy of what we're going to do lives within the ecosystem. Where I think a lot of companies and leaders miss is they think the other way around. It's like, here's our strategy. What do we want the culture to be within there? That's that bucket. Right. There's this bucket. If it's alive, you need to constantly nourish it, which also means you need to adapt, right? If, it's a drought, I need to add water. Oh, it's been raining a lot. I need to add water. And so with every new person that comes in or every person that leaves or someone's having maybe something going on in their life and it's affecting their work relationships that can happen, it directly correlates. So you have to be constantly shifting. I will say that we have this challenge. All right. So one of the things about the evolution of Nuun is when I was first coming into Nuun over 7 years ago, we were, for the most part, a lot of endurance athletes, like Ironman triathletes to ultra runners, marathoners. It was the vast majority, not everyone, but the vast majority. Today, I would argue that our team reflects much more of instead of the core of how we started, much more of the expansion market. I believe in movement and I know I need to get my heart rate up and sweat and hydration. So I hike and I commute to work by bike and that's my exercise. That's amazing. Truly, that's amazing. That reflects, I would argue, the bulk of our team today. Of course, there's Ironman athletes and et cetera, right. But not necessary. And so, and I can be part of the problem, by the way. I'm so appreciative of some people on our team in particular that have the courage to come to me and say, hey, Kevin, that didn't feel inclusive. Meaning, all right, team, let's take on this challenge together and we're all going to I'm just going to make this up, a 5K run, which actually probably wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that I would say that or longer. But I'd say 5K, we can all do that. But not everyone wants to do that. And so I think the balance here is, how do you still stoke the fire of some of the people that are the core and find connections within? There's kind of subgroups, but how do you also find ways to connect the different subgroups to make something big that everyone can do? And that's a constant struggle because I think I keep trying to make sure that it stays alive of unlocking your personal best. And my personal best is different than your personal best. And sometimes I lose sight of that. So it's a constant challenge, but I don't want people to be afraid to try and miss as well.
Well, and you don't have to be hardcore athlete like you are to be inspired by performance and what that stands for.
Totally agree. And Kashi was the same thing, right? At Kashi, our mission was around, we dream of a world where everyone embraces natural health. And when I think about that mission, we lived it, but it was to different extremes, right? So back then I wasn't a plant-based eater, and there were probably a handful of people that were vegan on the team. People were on different stages of the journey.
So one thing we talked about was when you came into Nuun, you had to formulate a strategy and evaluate existing capabilities of the team. Can you share that story?
Yeah, absolutely. So Nuun started 16 years ago. And I started, so I guess I'm at somewhere at that midpoint of the company. And the growth trajectory had started to soften. It wasn't negative, but the growth wasn't going at the same trajectory. And so the board felt like, hey, we need to change. So I was basically trying to figure out what was working. That was my first objective, not what wasn't working. What is working? And how do we put the amplifier on it? And one of the things that I wanted to do with Nuun was I go, listen, I think this brand can go from this ultra athlete, long distance person to much more of a wellness brand. Like it can bring more people in. If it's good enough for athletes, why can't we have this for everyone? And in order to do that, I had this fundamental belief around nutrition that expanded beyond our portfolio. And it was around clean ingredients and what's better for you and better for the planet. So natural clean ingredients. So that leads to the Vishal example. And I'm talking with Vishal, who's giving nutrition science advice and guiding us as a company, as a sales rep in Chicago. I'm like, wait, what? This guy has a nutrition degree and he's in Chicago and he's advising us already. If we're serious about this, and it's truly a platform of where we need to go to grow and be best in class as a company, we need to invest here. So Vishal is a great example. Today he's a director in the company. But moving him into Seattle from Chicago and then leading product development, it's such a great growth story. But it was really leveraging what his skill set was and what matched with the company's needs of where we were going. Arguably, maybe one of the best transitions I've seen in my career of something completely different, but yet he matched so tightly with where we had to go. He's a great example of someone who's developed into a really strong company-wide leader. His growth trajectory on that one is a great example, and he's on our leadership team today.
Let's talk about that. So how do you evaluate leadership competencies internally or when you're recruiting people externally? What do you look for in a leader?
I think that a leader is there to serve others. I guess in the words of the Red Bull of business consultants, Tom Peters, we're in the business of people. People serving people, serving people. I just love that summary because I think it says it all. Yeah. It sums it up. Here's why I say that. I think a leader takes accountability. And so when something goes right or wrong, more wrong, you take full accountability. When right, you quickly pass off to your team because their win is your win. So that is a key tenet. I think the other one is a leader, rather than focusing inward, they focus kind of outward. And that's, again, speaks to the servant leadership mentality that I mentioned. And I think the other one, I like to use the terminology of energy giving. I think that speaks to like the possibilities optimist in me. Energy giving to me means I believe in possibilities moving forward. So let's talk about the negative. Let's talk about the issue. Let's resolve that. I'm with you. Let's solve it, whatever that, how can I help you? And then let's go. If you can't get that ability at any given moment or day on energy giving, just try to minimize your impact, knowing it's just not my day. We all have those because what you do impacts others. You are who you surround yourself with.
When you're interviewing candidates, how do you evaluate whether or not they default to that energy giving mindset versus the opposite of maybe looking at the negative elements of a situation?
Not easy to pull out, truthfully. That said, I think one of the alarm bells that should go off for anyone is if, especially in an interview, if you're pointing blame at an individual and what they did wrong and what that might be. It doesn't mean you can't say, there was a challenge here. My question would be, so what do I do about that? How do I help resolve the issue? I will say that I've had learning in my career where I've had a gut instinct about something where I've heard the not taking it accountability and it was somebody else and what that may be. So I have this big belief in people. That also means my team. And so when we're assessing and we're debriefing on a candidate, it's like, but I didn't see that. I really see this, this, and this. I'll go, I agree on the competencies, really great competencies, but this individual, they're missing this. Like there's a lack of accountability and the team convinced me otherwise. I've gone with the team, and sometimes they're more right than I am, don't get me wrong. But the example I'm thinking of in this case, I'm like, oh gosh, in hindsight, and they would all agree, in hindsight, it's like, we knew this. It wasn't just like a nuance. It came across throughout. And I had plenty of specific examples that it should be enough information to say, I realize that all of you love the capabilities that an individual would bring, and I do too. But this person isn't going to work with the chemistry of the team because they're lacking the accountability and energy giving, and here's why. And I think you just got to hold strong when it comes through that tightly.
You also talk about empowering the team and enabling them to make decisions. Do you allow that to happen just as a learning experience around hiring? Because that's painful and costly and time consuming. Or are there other ways that you think leaders can maybe help elevate the capabilities and awareness of these things within their leadership teams before the hiring process?
I think you got to trust the team to make the decision. And I would say I default to that. The example that I'm referencing, that would be a very senior level in the organization. And so therefore the cost, good or bad, I think just have more ramifications. So I need to weigh in a little more on that.
Right.
We have a very broad cross-functional team that's looking at this, and I think you've got to trust the team on what they choose. And I'm there 90% of the time with them, quite honestly.
What are some of the things that you do to increase your knowledge of a candidate or to increase your confidence in those decisions?
So when the stakes are high, I think there is a benefit to getting expert help like yourself out there. And I think a great example of that is when we hired Jerry.
Jerry's the one hire we worked on together that was consequential at Nuun, just for context.
Massively, yeah.
What were the elements that you think brought clarity to the decision that you were making around that hire?
What I found working in this case with you, and I know this isn't about you, but there is something to be said about somebody has this objective expert voice that can help us assess and say why I think this is a really good fit for the competencies and how you've described your culture. Then we can then probe a little bit more to get that color to see whether or not we agree. So in this case, the amazing individual and leader on our team it's a great example of that success. I don't know if we would have found Jerry to be on our team without really working with an external partner in this situation for the real need that we had in terms of thinking not just CFO, but also COO mentality. And he's been a game changer.
Also, raising growth capital was another element of his experience.
Yeah.
And I think that really added significant value in the short term, but also through this whole trajectory you've been on.
I think it was Jerry's first or second day. We were together in a conference room interviewing investment bankers.
If I'm reflecting on that experience, you were very clear about the goal of the business and what you wanted this person to achieve, right? So you had said earlier that the business strategy was the first thing and all those elements kind of layered in.
If I were to kind of structure it in my brain and how I approach it is strategy, structure, people. It doesn't mean people's the least important. What it means is what's the path that you want to do to win? What's the structure that helps facilitate it? So we knew we needed this position that would get this strategy, this are the competencies we need. And then let's talk people, and then let's make sure that it's a culture add to the team. And that's exactly what he did. But it's that order, right? So think strategy, then structure, then people.
That's a great framework. So when you're hiring now that you've had that clarity around those elements, how does that process translate into a hiring methodology?
Well, I guess if you think about like annual plans, right? So when you think of strategy, you go like, what's this year going to look like for us? And then the 3-year roadmap to succeed. And then what's the structure today? And then moving down the road to facilitate it. And what's the type of leader? So I think the challenge that a lot of folks struggle with, including myself, is trying to understand what that future state is that individual has the potential to grow into it.
Yeah.
Or they've already done it before. They can get you there quicker, depending on who you can find and match. And so I think it's getting as clear as you can as to what success looks like for your business strategy and for your team's strategy for the structure.
I'm reflecting on some of the calls we've had over the years. You'll call me and say, we need to hire a director of this or a VP of that. And ultimately, we'll go through this process of exploring that role, and which is a good thing. But ultimately, 3 out of the 4 times you'll say, you know what? We actually don't need that job. So we figured out a way to make it work with the existing team. And perhaps that's the Canadian scrappiness we talked about. I think that's really interesting. You're always thinking about the capabilities of your team and different approaches to flowing talent into the areas that you need the business to focus in on.
I learned something about myself from some psychologists when I was interviewing at Miller Brewing Company. And Miller puts you through a battery of psychological tests, IQ tests, EQ, right? And then they summarize later. So I got in. I don't know how that happened, by the way, but so I got in. And so they then take you through and you meet with a psychologist to, hey, here's what you need to learn a little bit about you and what we've assessed. Only one thing's really stuck with me. It correlates with what you just said, which is anything to an extreme, by the way, is not good. So I have this innate reliance on my gut. I build a hypothesis, but I'm never stuck on it. That's the thing. I will quickly go, now I go prove or disprove it. So that's what you just described. And it's kind of the way I think. It's like, I think this is the answer. So the positive is there's a willingness to put something out there. So at least it gives a guiding light to then say whether or not that really was a light or not. And then you can divert.
So as we think about what's going on in the world right now in 2021, how have these huge health and social crises changed the game for you?
So 2020, and let's talk about that in particular, right? So you've got a health crisis of a pandemic. You've got a politically divided country that permeates within all cultures of all companies and sports teams, anything, right? And then you've got the social unrest and social uprising that really came to a head after the murder of George Floyd in particular.
Yeah.
So if I were to tell you, like prior to 2020, that those are going to be at the forefront of conversations that I'm having, like those type of things, macro level, little company Nuun, no, like not like that's outside our company, but it's very relevant and it's absolutely changed the way we do things. So let's focus on inclusivity, equity, diversity, right? We started a more formal training around DEI in Q4 of 2019. The reason why we did that, honestly, we were missing the mark when it came to diversity on our team and inclusion and the sense of equitable treatment. And in some cases, maybe that's absolutely true. The perception is definitely there, so therefore it's real. And that was more of a gender focus. And so when I first started Nuun, it was probably around a 70-30, maybe 75-25 male to female ratio. Today, it's 50-50. Okay, that sounds great. Well, sort of. So if you take it the upper part of the organization, it's male dominant. Okay, we need to get more diversity to reflect our target consumer and to reflect the world. Again, staying consistent with our obsession with the mission. So if that isn't consistent with you, then we have to keep finding diverse talent. So we were really focused primarily gender-wise and what do we need to do to get better and realize the systemic biases that we had there. What we weren't really focusing on a lot at that time, and that's where 2020 changed us saying, no, we need diversity beyond gender. We really need to focus there. And we were not doing that very well. And now today on our hiring practices, we are trying to find more talent across many different ethnicities, race, gender, et cetera. We're putting into practices on that one that we didn't do before. It wasn't that we didn't not do it. We're just like, we posted a job and whoever comes in, that's what we get. But like what you project out is what you're going to attract. Right. So we're getting a lot of more Kevins. And so we've really worked on that. Our marketing communication reflects that. There's more diversity in our marketing and we want to attract the best talent with a very diverse group. We do blind resumes. Now, blind resumes are only going to help you on this from a more diverse talent. It's good to take away bias. That's awesome. But to get more diverse talent, as you know, if we're not bringing in diverse talent, it's still a blind resume of the same group of people. We're far from perfect on that one. The other one I would say this, if I could, is the health crisis. One of the things that it's done is it's forced us all to work differently remotely, virtually. So here we are talking remotely together. I think our original intention was actually to get together in Portland.
Yeah, we tried that several times and then it kept getting pushed out. So here we are doing it virtually.
I will say this, though. We have embraced virtual conferencing for many years. In fact, when I was introduced to Zoom, I think it was 4 years ago, and someone on our team, Jeff Dean, super smart guy, a leader on our team, he's like, we should try maybe Zoom. And I go, what's that? And we did.
4 years ago, that was ahead of its time.
Exactly. The reason why we were doing that is inclusivity on our team is really important to me. And so you have a team in Seattle, which is about roughly half of the company, and half the team is in the field. Field sales and field marketers. Field marketers now are doing different things because there's nothing for them to do in market. But the field sales folks, but is like half the team's out there. And I go, how do we make them feel part of Seattle? And how do we build off the energy of them? And I said, phone calls are not enough, and really wanted to bring video into it. So it was more of a two-dimensional conversation. That's worked incredibly well. And so we fortunately made this transition to a virtual world seamlessly. I guess the one difference is when we go back to whatever the new normal is, the requirement to be in office as much as we really wanted people there, there's no way it's going to be where it was.
How has hiring people virtually been working for you during the pandemic? Has that been an easy shift?
I think it's been very successful, actually. We have a lot of new hires in the last year. Like, honestly, I think all of them are doing exceptionally well. So that says our assessment of talent and culture ad and they assessing us is coming through. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I thought it would be, but it's not.
Do you think that's going to continue after at all levels?
I think it will for us. But you know what? There's still several industries that I think really want to go back to the way it was. You know, as you know, I'm speaking with financial investors and I'm setting up Zoom calls with them. And you know, what's fascinating to me is some of them still don't put on their video.
Yeah. I was on a regular conference call the other day, and without the video, I felt like there was something missing in terms of the connection, the difference between a video call versus a phone call. I think we're getting a lot more out of those calls now in terms of connecting on a personal level than maybe before the pandemic, where it was more of a novelty and unusual. We're getting comfortable with it, I guess.
100% agree. By the way, I will say worth noting is their Zoom fatigue is real.
Yeah.
Again, anything to an extreme, right, becomes a negative.
So is there anything specifically that you're excited about as you think about the future for yourself and the company?
I would say we're yet at another inflection point. We grew significantly in 2020. And so, you know, 2020s can be described as, from a business perspective and the digital transformation omni experience, it's the year of the accelerant. So people are shopping in different ways, right? So there's a saying that I once heard that I've repeated many times: as fast as the world is moving today, it will never be this slow again. 2020 took that to a different level. Yeah. And so the focus point for me is really having us think and act and behave and structure like an omni experience company. And so how do we build more digital capabilities? The team's doing such a great job there. And so that transformation is going to continue to be. And so like we're going to continue to accelerate growth. And I think that's going to be a key component. And I say that because think about this one. The part where I actually haven't figured out how it evolves is the traditional sales role. It's changing before the team's eyes, because how you deal with buyers is now on, you know, virtual conferencing. Yeah. Trade shows don't exist. There's just so many differences. And what does that mean? And then what skill set do we need to help infuse for talent for them? Like how do we help them grow in a new world that's still shaping? Like we're still trying to define it. It's the one area that I'm like, I don't know what that means. I will say, as an example of what we did to show how we're embracing the change, is e-commerce, digital commerce, if you will. So from DTC to e-commerce retailers, that's actually moved from the sales organization to the marketing organization. which it's like a massive revenue generator. So it might seem counterintuitive to people, but how you win is very much digital marketing, how you succeed, how you reach, how you connect. So that's a big transformation happening right now, and that's going to continue to accelerate. And so because of the pandemic, people are thinking about two things that I think will make the world a better place: preventative health and investing in their health. So whether that's hydration, resilience, or moving, like people are thinking about that more than ever across all age groups, right? So when you're younger, you think you're invincible. That's not the case anymore. People are thinking about that. Love that. Two, I'm hopeful on this one. And I think it's also made us rethink the impact on our planet. And I think we can be a catalyst for that change as well. So as you know, we've chosen not to do a ready to drink. Yeah. We're like, how do we reduce our reliance? So it doesn't mean it will go away, but our reliance on like one-time use, single-use plastic for every consumption we make. And I think we can continue to push that boundary at Nuun. And those are two things that when I think of game changing for the world, that's what gets me excited, and that's what we need to push.
You're
forward.
Squarely in the middle of those circles.
Yeah, and that's a fun place to be.
Yeah, I feel fortunate this past year. A lot of our clients are in the healthy, active lifestyle sectors. And of course, now these things are becoming more ingrained in the consumer mindset. So I want to circle back and just talk about your future and how do you see your career evolving in the years ahead?
What's in the future for me? First part, I'm here now and I'm all in with the team at Nuun. Like I'm all in. Of course, I don't know what the future holds, and we should always be growing our mindset and what that looks like. I think it's really important that I emphasize that because that's how I feel and that's how I live, eat, and breathe. I'm all in. I'm right here, right now. One of the things that I've really become passionate about is around, I love speaking, and I think maybe there's an opportunity for me to share what I've learned over my career journey and get out there in front of people and share that so they don't have to recreate the wheel and they can maybe learn from my mistakes and what's worked.
That's the whole reason for this podcast, to create value and to talk about an imperfect science such as hiring and to help people who are, learning how to take their hiring to the next level. And there's not a lot of content out there for that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. You're such a great positive influence, and I always appreciate when we have the opportunity to spend time together. You have such a great outlook, and your success is obviously not a surprise. And I'm always inspired by what you're doing in your leadership. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Roy, thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here, and I love chatting with you. And you do incredible work. I admire you as a human and you as a leader.
Thanks for tuning in to How I Hire. Visit howihire.com for more details about our show. How I Hire is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, and all major listening platforms. Follow us wherever you listen to get new episodes as soon as they're released. You can also leave us a rating or a review. The best way to support our show is by letting friends and colleagues know about us. How I Hire is created by Noda Group Executive Search. To find out more about Noda Group, visit nodagroup.com and follow us on LinkedIn. This podcast was produced by Anna McLean. To learn more about her work, visit aomclean.com.